Dear students, welcome you all. Today we are going to discuss about the topic Landscape of India, Physiographic Features and Society. The main focus will be on to understand better the visible differences in the topography of the different parts of the country, to study principal environmental factors that also determine the relationship between the physical geography of any region and its settlement patterns, the location and vastness of India's landforms, plains, plateaus, hills, and mountains, and her past history, climate, land use, means of transportation, distribution of population, and their relation to physical features of India. Dear students, let's introduce the topic. India is a vast geographical region and assumes the scale of a subcontinent. It has diverse climatic and biogeographic features sustaining a wide pattern of human settlements. The patterns of living, material culture, and consumption behavior of the settlements differ in response to diverse ecological settings. It's therefore worthwhile to examine the landscape features in India in relation to patterns of human settlements. Now, we are going to discuss about the physical features. India can be divided into the following four major physiographic divisions. A high mountain barrier formed by the Himalayas in the north and the eastern highlands in the east. The plains of northern India or the Ganga-Yamuna Doab. The plains of peninsular India, south of the North Indian plains, Indian Plateau. The coastal lowlands fringing the plateau of peninsular India. These four regions are distinctly different from one another in respect of their surface configuration. The Himalayas are young-fold mountains with great rise, highly uneven surface, very steep slopes, little level land, and young river valleys. Against that, peninsular India is an old shield block having plain areas, relict mountains, and old river valleys. The plains of northern India are flat and alluvial without much local relief except bluffs of the old banks of the rivers and are of recent origin. Dear students, we will first discuss the Himalayas. The Himalayas form a highly rugged and continuous stretch of high mountainous country, which flanks northern India for a considerable length and runs from the Brahmaputra Gorge in the east to the Indus in the west. They cover an area of nearly 2,500 km in length and 150 to 400 km in width. Rising abruptly from the plains, the Himalayas rest against UT Ladakh and the Tibetan Plateau in the form of an arc-like rim. They are one of the youngest fold mountains on the earth. Uplift of the Himalayas at irregular intervals has helped rejuvenate the rivers. The Vale of Kashmir, about 135 km long and 40 km broad, is the only large-level strip of land in the Himalayas. In general, the Himalayas consist of three main ranges: the Shivalik range along the southern margin, the Great Himalaya along the Tibetan border, and in between these two is the Lesser Himalaya. Additionally, there is a range in the east known as the Eastern Highlands. Number second, the Shivalik range. This range has low parallel ridges made up of mainly boulder and clay, and these ridges are the foothills of the Himalayas. From a breadth of nearly 50 km in the west, it narrows gradually towards east and loses its identity in the Bengal Duars. The height of these ridges usually does not exceed 1,220 meters. Most of these ridges had formed after the formation of the Himalayas, thus they obstructed the courses of the rivers draining to the south and west and created temporary lakes in which debris brought by those rivers was deposited. As the rivers had cut their courses through the Shivalik range, the lakes were drained, leaving behind plains called dunes. One such plain formed as a result of the draining of lakes is Dehradun. which is 600 meters above sea level in Uttaranchal. Now we are going to talk about the Lesser Himalaya. These ranges rise north of the Shivalik range and being deeply cut by rivers are highly rugged and ill-defined. They are more clearly defined in their expanse towards west, where they are known as the Dhaula Dhar, the Pir Panchal and Nag Tiba. The Mahabharat range and the Mussoorie range are the two other ranges of the Lesser Himalaya that run as continuous ranges for long distances. These ranges vary a lot in height but are generally less than 3,050 meters above the sea level. Some of their peaks rise to heights of even more than 4,570 meters, particularly branches closer to the Great Himalaya and are also known as Himachal. The Lesser Himalaya are about 80 kilometers in breadth. Now we are going to discuss the Great Himalaya. It's also known as Himadri. It is the longest continuous range among the Himalayas. It's also the highest range in the world with an average height of 6,100 meters. The highest peak of the world, the Mount Everest, is situated at the northern border of Nepal. In the northwest, the Great Himalaya ends in Nanga Parbat, whereas in the east it culminates in Namcha Bawa, close to the Brahmaputra in Tibet. The Great Himalaya is snowbound throughout the year and creates glaciers which descend to a height of 2,440 meters above the sea level in Jammu and Kashmir and about 3,960 meters in the east. Being snowbound for a larger part of the year, this range is forbidding and can be crossed only by a few passes. Pack animals like mules, yaks, and goats were used earlier in the absence of metalled roads for carrying goods across these passes. The Buzil Pass and the Zojila in Jammu and Kashmir, the Baralachla and the Shinkla in Himachal Pradesh, the Niti Pass and the Lipu Lak Pass in Uttar Pradesh, and the Nathula and the Jalipla in Sikkim are some of the prominent passes to cross the Great Himalaya. This range has served as a natural barrier between India and Tibet. In the northern part of Jammu and Kashmir, there is another high mountain range called the Karakoram. It is a trans-Himalayan range which runs roughly in the east-west direction. Some of the peaks of this range rise above 4,620 meters. The second highest peak in the world, K2, which happens to be the highest peak in the territory of India, rises majestically like a cone in the midst of other slightly less high peaks of the Karakoram Mountains. Dear students, now we are going to learn about the Eastern Highlands. These mountains consist of hill ranges which pass through the northeastern state of Arunachal Pradesh and run in north-south direction in the form of crescent. To the north lies a high mountainous land called the Dabha Bum, which is highest point 4,578 meters. From the southern end of the Dabha Bum starts the Patkai Bum. It forms the international boundary between India and Burma for some distance southwards, and then it merges into the Naga Range. Further south, this mountainous belt is called the Manipur Hills, generally less than 2,500 meters in elevation in Manipur state, the Mizo Hills in the state of Mizoram, and the Tripura Hills in Tripura state. The ranges are folded and alternate with valleys. This range and valley character of the topography has developed a special drainage pattern known as trellised drainage. The sources of the three important rivers of India, namely the Brahmaputra, the Satluj, and the Indus, have their sources near Lake Manasarva, which is in Tibet, situated to the north of the Great Himalaya. A few other rivers, such as the Bhagirathi, Alaknanda, Karnali, Gandak, Arunkosi, Tista, and the Manas, have completely cut back their courses in the Great Himalaya and have thus formed very deep gorges. These rivers, for some distance, run parallel to the mountain ranges before they descend on the plains of northern India. Now we are going to discuss about the plains of northern India. These plains situate in the east-west direction between the Himalayas in the north and the Deccan Plateau of peninsular India in the south. They form a continuous stretch of alluvium land varying in width from 500 km to 240 km. The Satluj Plain in the west, the Ganga Plain in the middle, and the Ganga Delta and the Brahmaputra Valley in the east constitute these plains. The desert in the west of the Aravalli Range, being largely a plain, is also included in the plains of northern India. These plains continue to the west beyond the Punjab and Rajasthan and converge with the Indus Plain in Pakistan. Measuring about 650,000 square kilometers, these are amongst the largest plains of the world, and they account for 1/5 of the area of India. Now we are going to learn about the Indian Plateau. It's also called the Plateau of peninsular India, as it stretches south of the alluvial plains of northern India. It looks like a large triangle with its apex in the south at Kanyakumari. It's far older than the Himalayan mountain ranges and is formed essentially of the ancient igneous rocks. The valleys of the Damodar, the Mahanadi, and the Godavari roughly mark the position of the Gondwana region. The Narmada and the Tapti valleys leading to the Arabian Sea are rift valleys formed along after the Gondwana period. The Narmada Rift Valley continues to the northeast and is occupied by the River San. The Malwa Plateau is inclined towards the north and is formed by horizontally bedded sandstones, limestones, and shales laid down during the pre-Gondwana period. It is suggested that during this era, the Malwa Plateau was submerged under the sea. South of the Satpura Range, the peninsula is called the Deccan Plateau. It is believed that large-scale volcanic eruptions took place in the Cretaceous period, which spread far and wide over the Indian Plateau, covering completely the landforms existing at the time. The subregions of the Indian Plateau are described below. The Aravalli Range. It runs in the northeast-southwest direction from Delhi to the northwestern fringe of Gujarat state. Between Delhi and Ajmer, it can be characterized by a chain of detached and discontinuous ridges running also in the northeast to southwest direction and forms basins of inland drainage here and there. The range is almost continuous south of Ajmer. The highest peak of the Aravalli Range is situated in Mount Abu. Now we are going to talk about the Vindhya Range. The Narmada Valley is flanked in the north by a steep-sided escarpment, long steep face of plateau, formed due to the presence of the Malwa Plateau. This escarpment, considered wrongly as a mountain sometimes, is known as the Vindhya Range and runs roughly northeastwards along the northern fringe of the Narmada Sun for about 1,200 km. The western part of this range is covered with lava. The eastern part of this range, not covered with lava, is known as the Kaimur Hills. Now, we are going to discuss the Satpura Range. It starts from the west coastal plain and runs eastwards between the Narmada and the Tapti Purna rivers and continues up to Amarkantha, covering about 900 kilometers. Its western extremity is known as the Rajpipla Hills and the easternmost part as the Amarkantak Plateau, and in the middle we can find the Mahideo Hills. The eastern part of the Amarkantak Plateau, known as the Maikala Range, overlooks the Chhattisgarh Plain. Dubga near Pachmari is the highest point of the Satpura Range. Now, we are going to talk about the Chhattisgarh Plain. It is a basin drained by the upper Mahanadi. It lies to the east of the Maikala Range, and Low Keraga Plateau separates it from the Vain Ganga Valley. The basin is laid with nearly horizontal beds of limestone and shales and is enclosed by hills or plateaus. Now, we are going to discuss the Chota Nagpur Plateau. It lies to the east of the Rihand. It includes the Bihar Plateau and the adjoining eastern fringe of Madhya Pradesh and Purulia district of West Bengal, the Ranchi Plateau in the south, the Hazaribagh Plateau in the north, along with the Rajmahal Hills in the northeast, constitute important physiographic sections of the Chota Nagpur Plateau. Parasnath in the eastern part is the highest point. The northeastern edge of the Chota Nagpur Plateau is termed as the Rajmahal Hills, and it runs in the north-south direction. Now we are going to discuss the coastal lowlands. The plateau of peninsular India is fringed with narrow coastal lowlands, raised beaches, and wave-cut platforms above the high water mark signify that these lowlands are essentially the emergent floors of the seas adjacent to the land. After the emergence of these lowlands, fluctuations in sea level, though limited to small areas, have brought some changes in the general surface features of the littoral. West coastal lowlands. The physiography of west coastal lowlands is varied. It contains marshes, lagoons, mudflats, peninsulas, creeks, gulfs, and islands. The Rann of Kutch and Kathiawar and the Gujarat Plain are the major physiographic regions. The Rann of Kutch lies to the north of Kutch, earlier a gulf and now a vast desolate lowland. It was formed due to the deposition of silt brought mainly by the Indus in the past. Its surface is only slightly above sea level and is interspersed with mudflats, marshes, and creeks. It is covered with shallow water during the rainy season and is being continuously filled up by the silt brought by the rivers. There are a few islands in the Rann, with Bela, Khadir, and Pacham islands as the only ones of significant size. Kutch, once an island, lies to the south of the Rann of Kutch. It is an arid area with generally broad sandy terrain along the coast and the Rann of Kutch, and bare low rocky ridges in the interior. Coastal lowlands of Goa and Konkan to the south of Bombay are marked with the low hills separated by river courses that form creeks near the sea. The fact that the drowning of the lower courses of the rivers has taken place clearly suggests that there has been some recent submergence, though on a small scale, of the coast north of Marmagua. Now we are going to talk about east coastal lowlands. East coastal lowlands is broad compared to the western lowlands, and it's broadest in Tamil Nadu, where its width ranges from 100 to 120 kilometers. North of the Godavari Delta, the coastal lowland is narrow as the Eastern Ghats closes on the sea. At some places, it is as narrow as 32 kilometers in width. Since the plateau of peninsular India, especially of the Satpura range, is tilted to the east, all rivers of the Deccan, with the exception of the Tapti, flow eastwards and reach the Bay of Bengal. These rivers have spread alluvium over almost whole of this plain and have built large deltas at several places. Now we are going to talk about vegetation. The Indian subcontinent has been witness to a very long period of human activity. During the course of this activity, the vegetation cover present in the earliest time has been considerably modified. As a matter of fact, little trace of this vegetation, except on the higher reaches of the mountains, is to be seen today. If one has to imagine the features of the natural origin vegetation, one would most be struck by the fact that it essentially was a tree vegetation or forest cover. Over several millennia of human activity involving clearance and degradation of this forest cover, today only about 1/5 of the total area of India is regarded as under the forest, treated as the protected forest. Half of the protected forest area has been designated as the reserved forest, where all kinds of degrading activity are prohibited. There is evidence to suggest that central Punjab and the Ganga-Yamuna doab was covered with vast forests at the time of Alexander's campaign. The vegetation cover of India has been classified on the basis of the types of trees present. Accordingly, it has been divided into the following 5 categories. moist tropical, dry tropical, montane, subtropical, montane, temperate, alpine types. Now we are going to talk about moist tropical type. The forest of this type is basically the rainforest that's wet and evergreen or semi-evergreen. It's found in the high rainfall areas where the dry season is short. In places where the dry season is either intermittent or more prolonged, the forest becomes semi-evergreen. The tree cover in the forest of this type is very dense and very high. It's found along the Western Ghats to the south of Mumbai and in Assam. Now, we are going to talk about dry tropical types. This type grows in areas which have moderate rainfall and that too concentrated in a short period of time. The remaining dry season that is fairly prolonged harbors the growth of this type. The area occupied by the forests of this kind extends in central and peninsular India as also along the Shivaliks in Himachal Pradesh. The trees grow up to a medium height and permit the undergrowth of shrubs and spiny vegetation. Dear students, now we are going to talk about montane subtropical type. The subtropical types or rainforests having a stunted growth. The two main areas where they are found are the Nilgiris and Anamalai Palani hills in the south. It may have covered the Satpura and Maikal hills and Mount Abu in the past, though most of it has now vanished. Now, we are going to talk about montane temperate type. This type of forest extends in the lower reaches of Himalaya where the rainfall is moderate, though regular. The main trees found are oaks, chestnuts, and laurels. It also grows pines, cedars, silver firs, and spruces. Rhododendrons and some varieties of bamboo are also seen in good numbers in this forest. Now we are going to talk about alpine type. This type grows in the middle levels of Himalaya. The main types of trees and vegetation are silver firs, juniper, pines, rhododendrons, and birches. The forest types in India and their geographical distribution has been depicted in the following map. Now we are going to discuss about the soils. Soils support vegetation as also agriculture and have therefore been of vital importance in giving Indian landscape a definite view. The traditional classification of the soils in India, as noted by Spate and Lerthmont, was in four main categories: alluvium, regur, black cotton soils, red soils, and laterite. An early attempt to classify soil types was made by the Russian scientist Z.J. Shukalsky in 1932. This was essentially an attempt at synthesizing the existing knowledge, and its value lay in the fact that it prepared ground for systematic soil study. In India, a soil survey was set up in the year 1956, and it has been working since then to map the soil distribution pattern in India. Soil conservation has been an important environmental concern as it sustains vegetation and agriculture both. Many human activities have directly or indirectly resulted in soil erosion in a major way, causing in some cases an irreparable loss of the soil for posterity. Since consolidation has to precede conservation, the task becomes more difficult as convincing measures requiring cooperation on large scale need to be adopted. Soil fertility and soil productivity are other related issues, but they need to be addressed by scientists primarily. Dear students, the description of the physical features of India provides the ideal backdrop to examine the social perception of landscape as it evolved since ancient times. The beginning of civilization in India is traced to the semi-arid region of Sindh. The river valleys of the arid region provided suitable conditions for the emergence and growth of a society based on agriculture. At that time, the technological constraints forced humans to not venture to the densely forested areas of Ganga, Yamuna, Doab, and the foothills of the Himalayas. It's only in the early Vedic literature, that glimpses of the expansion of human settlement from the northwestern India towards the Ganga-Yamuna Doab are provided in ample measure. It should be noted that the landscape was visualized not only in terms of the economic and strategic significance, but also its aesthetic value that was appreciated. Ancient literature is full of references where landscape has been glorified in terms of the bounty it provided and the visual pleasure it offered. In the ancient Tamil poetry, love of man and woman is taken as the ideal expression of inner self as well as outer world. Information about landscape is also available for the medieval period. A close examination of the Persian sources of the medieval period reveals that the region of Ganga-Yamuna Doab then had a different landscape. The general features of Indian landscape and the changes in these features in the historical period have determined the types of human settlements in different areas and their subsequent growth. Annual deposition of rich alluvial soil in Indus gave rise to civilization and settlements that lasted in the region for nearly 2,000 years. The landscape changes and often results is irreversible losses of vegetation forms. The lesson for us is developmental priorities of a democratic country like ours should be decided keeping the concerns of environmental conservation and factors giving rise to degradation in the foreground. Thanking their students. This is all for today.